friends. Thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation Dick and I had about the 2025 Canadian, Austrian, and British Grand Prix. McLaren's dominance is now leading to a battle between their drivers. Max is unlikely to repeat being world champion. Nico got onto the podium. Teams are now focusing on 2026. As you'll hear, Dick and I unpack our highlights from this month's races while also giving our opinion on where we believe the teams and drivers are at this midpoint of the season. But before we get to our conversation, I need to ask, can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Dick, it is the middle of the 25 season. Can you believe that?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like the season has felt long,
Mm-hmm.
kind of, and yet we're only halfway through. And I'm kind of like, when I realized that, I was kind of like, no kidding. I mean, it was pretty interesting to when they said that because I was like, man, there's still a whole lot to play for and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of racing to be done. So anyway, well, literally 2,400 miles more of racing, basically.
Oh, really? That's how much,
If you
like,
figure it,
distance?
yeah, if you figure each Grand Prix is 200 miles, there's 2,400 miles still to go.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't think about it like that. Wow. That is a lot. I'm
That's a
feeling
lot.
it. I mean, I have great empathy all year long, I think, for our F1 traveling circus that
Yep.
happens, and I just literally am stationary, but
Hmm.
they get to go all around the globe and do what they do, and I'm tired. And
Yeah.
yet they keep pulling it out, keep bringing entertainment and technical advancement and putting their all. And I think when we talk about this month, I mean, you can really see everybody is all in.
Yep.
And one of the many reasons why I think we love the sport. So we have had 3 races that we're going to cover. It's mostly the month of June, but because of the way that it fell, we're going to do this first week of July. You and I
Yep.
are recording this before we're actually getting our race notes out for Silverstone, just because of the timing of how we're needing to record versus how we're going to release. So we'll say that to our audience so they know. And so they may get redundancies, or hopefully we'll catch what we said here to make it clear for those who are going to get the race notes ahead of time.
Right.
But wow is all I can say for this month. I feel like this month was, at least in my opinion, one of the many reasons why you watch motorsport, watch Formula One through the ebbs and flows of how a season or how teams can come and go, come to really great highs, really great lows. And when we kind of slog it out through snooze fest, this month was not. I don't think any of these races were snooze fest, in
No.
my opinion, right? Did you
No,
feel
I
that they
agree.
were?
No,
Yeah.
I felt they were all very good with some absolutely weird, chaotic happenings,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes depending on drivers going for gaps that didn't exist,
Mm-hmm.
or the weather continually throwing a joker on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very interesting to say the least.
Yeah, and I wonder when you say about the weather throwing the Joker, I wonder if that's probably one of the reasons why these 3 are so good is that the weather is so erratic in each of those 3 places. You
Yep.
can't go in assuming it's going to be stable, especially Austria and especially Silverstone. You
Hmm.
know that it can turn on a dime.
Yep.
And then Canada, it just feels like it's always going to have rain. Like whether or not it's going
Right.
to be buckets versus just sprinkles can be the differential. So that I think this, and I am glad that these 3 happen at this point in the racing season as well. And I think we'll
Sure.
talk about this because at this point, cars are at their kind of place that we think that they will stay, especially in 25 looking to 26.
Yeah.
We don't expect these cars to do major upgrades that's going to substantially change it for 25. It'll just be track specific. We were talking about that before we turned on the recorder. And so to have the variable of weather and then also the layouts of these tracks are also so different from one another. That also
Right.
makes it a very interesting process. And I think because of the point in the season we are, those who are rookies, yes, it may be the first time that they're at that specific track, but they're also getting to be a little bit more comfortable or confident or
Hmm.
accustomed to their car or their team, And
Right.
so then that also is helping us to see them maybe feeling more confident to push the car or push themselves, which then, as
Yep.
we know, can lead to good. It can also lead to not good
Yeah.
situations for them. So again, I think that this month gives a great opportunity to kind of evaluate and experience some of the wonderful things that come from Formula One. So,
Hmm.
on that note, I wanted to share my highlight for Canada. I could give you all three of my highlights, but then I feel like I'd be talking forever and then everyone will turn off their podcast. So, I'll just go with
Doubt
Canada
that, but
and
go
then,
for it.
yeah, okay. All right. So, for me, the highlight was Kimmy's podium, his first podium, and then Nico and Alonso in the points. I
Yep.
loved that that all happened at Canada. I mean, it just felt like such a great way to come back to racing after we'd had Barcelona.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought Canada was one of those races that really had a lot of well, just massive unpredictability, I guess is the best way to put it. You think about it, I mean, they had cooler than normal temperatures and the Mercedes came alive, right? And George, let's face it, I mean, he put in a great display of driving. Max, of course, was right there the whole way, and Kimi got his first podium. Those were, I think, three really good storylines, quite frankly. And I also think that the whole thing about Lando going for a gap that wasn't there between, concrete wall on one side and, Oscar on the other side, part of me says, hey, man, he went for it. He shouldn't have gone for it, but he did. And it's kind of like kudos to him for doing that. But of course, the other part was it would have been a whole lot better if the gap had actually been there. And, I think Lando has been putting an awful lot of pressure on himself to get past Oscar and kind of reestablish himself as the guy at McLaren. And right now it's clearly, you know, what weekend is it? And that'll tell you, well, it's going to be either Oscar's or Lando's weekend as we have seen. So that's kind of the stuff that I'm sitting here looking at. And of course, I think about the championship implications. If Lando had said, you know what, I may not get around Oscar, but I'm going to score useful points, and we're going to go to Austria, and we'll get him then, where would he be in the point standings now? It wouldn't have damaged him nearly as much as, smashing his car into that concrete wall. Anyway, that's just part of the drama of watching these guys go for it.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on so many levels because when that crash happened, I was so disappointed because those were the thoughts that I had because he had made a number of mistakes during that race, and I think I even said this during in my race notes. I felt like he took too long to overtake and he got a little panicky.
Yeah,
And if he had just if and it's easy for me to say that sitting and watching and not having all the pressure, not dealing with all that comes from what he's trying to achieve. So I'm not saying this in like a condescending way. I just remember
sure.
my heart just hurt for him thinking you didn't need to do that. You could have done this differently and you could have points right now. Instead, and because he's so hard on himself, I also felt bad because I think when you get quiet, you'll realize what we all who are not in the thick of it can see.
Yeah.
And that's where I just felt such sadness for him and
Yeah.
hoped that he could come out of that with the minimal scarring of it and instead
Hmm.
could fuel himself into Austria, into Silverstone, and it could be a lesson learned. Like mature, I guess it kept coming to me that this is the difference between maturity and immaturity, and it's not saying that he's an immature person in general. It's just that it's the seasoning that happens as you go through life experience,
Right.
that it's only received by going through life and making, like, all of us can say that no matter what we're doing,
Oh,
there are
yeah,
things that
for
we look
sure.
back, right? And so
Yep.
that was rough, I think. And just and I had hoped that moving forward the team would help him to see, that wasn't necessary without berating him, but really teach is a teachable moment, I guess. And I felt
Right.
like moving on to Austria, I felt the fact that they let the two of them race did kind of in a quiet way allow for that to happen.
Right.
And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. And, what was interesting was, is if, to your point, right? Oscar finishes second to Lando. Lando certainly shook off whatever bad juju he may have had as a result of Montreal. And he really was the guy to beat in Austria, in my opinion. And Oscar said as much in that, yeah, I'm disappointed to finish second. And yes, my qualifying, okay, that kind of thing. But on the day, he goes, I probably wasn't going to beat Lando. Because Lando, whatever reason, he loves the Red Bull ring. That guy always goes well there for some reason. And I think that shows a little bit of the difference of the mentality of Oscar, who just basically says, yep, wasn't our day. You know, I took second in the points. Thank you very much. On to the next race. I think you really got the feeling that that's where Oscar was, that's where his head was at.
Yeah, especially in Canada, I think that's the case. We'll move forward into Silverstone. I want to unpack that with you because, right now, as we're recording, everybody's talking about the Silverstone aftermath for Oscar and Lando. But let's put a pin and come back to that in a little bit. Let's go on to Austria. Well, no, I'm sorry. I do want to say with my highlight for Kimmy, you noted it too. The Mercedes one and three in
Yep.
Canada was very impressive. I didn't expect them to do that well.
They
Did
probably didn't
you?
either.
Yeah, I was
Honestly.
like, wow, because the temperatures had increased. I thought surely they would do better if it had been a little bit lower, but it was nice to see at that point them sitting P2 in the constructors and thinking, okay, we've got a month of racing. Could this be the pivotal turnaround
Right.
for them?
Right.
Unfortunately, we're sitting in Silverstone, post Silverstone, and that's not quite the case, but
No.
we won't totally steal our own thunder just yet. But okay, so then moving on to Austria, my highlight was the Sauber double points
Hmm.
and Gabriel getting his first points. And even more micro was Fernando coming and giving Gabriel a hug and just that human to human, experienced veteran racer to rookie, and then of course the management role that he serves to Gabriel was probably also a catalyst for that. But I felt like even as I watched it, it really wasn't just about the manager. It was a veteran racer congratulating the rookie for getting
Yep.
up there in a car that all of us have been kind of questioning what's happening, and
Yep.
especially in Austria going, what's going on, Sauber? What are you turning a corner? And then of course at that point that was the second or third race I think that Nico had been bringing in points, but I
Right.
don't think we would have known what I think we know now is that this could be some major changes at Sauber, potentially bringing the car forward in the pack. I don't know. You
Right.
you could talk about that when we get to more the analysis of the teams. But for me, that was the highlight. The Sauber double points, Gabriel getting his first points, and then Fernando giving him the hug.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, Alonso made it really, really difficult for anybody to get past him right at the end of the race. And I suspected, and it was later confirmed, I can't remember where I saw this, but Fernando was actually slowing everybody down in the hopes that Lando would lap him before the just before the end of the race, so he wouldn't have to race the full race distance, and he didn't have to then keep people like Bortoleto and Hulkenberg behind him for that final lap. And so he drove a race where he was fast enough, where it was very difficult to pass, but slow enough that allowed Norris to get around him and cross the finish line. And if you watched it again, Fernando was not that many car lengths behind Lando, but he did not have to drive that last lap and defend for another lap over the Saubers, who were clearly quicker at that time. It was a very cagey, well judged performance by Fernando. And he seems to have been able to finally get away from that cartoon anvil that's been dropping out of the sky. He's actually scoring points consistently now, which is good to see. The other thing that I would call out is that Liam Lawson had a hell of a good race. Finished sixth in Austria. You know, for a while there, I thought Alonso was going to get him, but towards the end, he actually pulled away, Lawson did, from Fernando. And there was just nothing that Alonso could do about him. So, considering where Liam started the year and where he is today, or at least as of going through Austria, I've got to hand it to him. He's doing good. He's shaking it off.
I agree with you on Liam. I actually know that in my race notes for Austria, I said he should have gotten driver of the day because of the way that he drove that race that week
Hmm.
was so good and impressive. And especially as you noted, the year that he's had, it is, it was really good. And for it to happen at the Red Bull Ring, also a very nice
Yep.
moment, especially after Max had been DNF'd out because of the crash, right? Like, so that was something for a Red Bull fan to look at because Yuki also unfortunately didn't have a good race that week either.
No.
So I think that that's a really good highlight to point out. I did not realize the tactics that and strategy that Fernando had deployed. I'm not surprised. And I think
Right.
it's fantastic because it did have the pour over effect of affecting not only his own race, but Gabriel's and everybody else's. So kudos to playing three-dimensional chess while you're driving nearly 200 miles an hour at the Red Bull Ring. I mean,
Yeah,
are we
it was a
surprised?
little bit of a Sunny Hayes moment, you
Yeah, yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah, totally,
from Formula One, the
totally.
movie,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
that's right
yeah.
there. A couple of things also that I call out about Austria that kind of stood out to me. One, Europe at the time was undergoing a heat wave. I mean, it was really hot in Austria, and yet George Russell drove a solitary race home to fifth in a car that supposedly doesn't work in the heat. Well, I mean, not supposedly, it just doesn't. You know, it works well when it's cool, not when it's hot. And you know what? Again, and we've talked about this, George is just having this sneaky, quiet season where he's actually threading together a very strong season. He's winning or scoring big points when it's available, and he's actually turning lemons into lemonade when there's really on the surface of it, there's not a whole lot to be gathered. And he's turning in a season that he can be proud of. I've been super impressed with George. The other part is that I thought it was very interesting that Antonelli and Max came together on the first lap. Disaster for Max, did not help him in the world championship standings at all. And yet he was very calm and really didn't jump all over Antonelli. None of that. It was almost like he's had too many conversations with Mercedes and didn't want to rock the boat. That's just conspiracy theorist to me, but I thought it was really interesting how well Max took this whole event. I'll just say that and throw that out there.
Okay. Do you want to talk about that now or do you want to talk about it later?
Let's talk about it later.
Okay,
We'll
because
talk
I
about
have thoughts.
Silverstone.
I
I
have
have some thoughts
thoughts.
too. Oh, I have thoughts
Yeah.
too.
Okay. All right. So everybody listening, just if we somehow forget it, you remind us and we'll come back to this. I don't think we will because I'm writing it down and I
Hmm.
generally remember when we write it down. Okay. So then is that all your highlights for Austria or do
Yeah,
you have any more? Okay.
that's probably enough. Yeah.
Yeah, that's well, I mean, it was a really good race. Silverstone, you're going to need to buckle up because I got a lot to say about this one.
All right.
All right. Nico. That was my highlight, bar none. I know there was amazing stuff that happened. Lando got his win at Silverstone as a Brit. Kudos to him. But for me, that P3 for Nico, as it was happening, I was sitting there going, no way. This is so great. This is so great. I actually cried because I think for me personally, it resonated. It's everything that all of us, regardless of whether we're not an athlete, whether or not we're a racer, we can take inspiration from Nico in what he accomplished yesterday. We're recording this on Monday. Um, Never giving up. You saw it start to like trickle through all the socials, but like in that moment, that's what I kept thinking. The resilience,
Hmm.
the self-belief and willingness to say, I know I can do this despite everybody else's perceptions, despite the fact that like I do believe and agree that he's not been placed in a car that has allowed him to truly show his talent. And
Right.
we had a conversation with Ross Bentley, which is a great interview. Any of our listeners who haven't listened to it should go back and listen to. We had a deep dive into this when Ross was giving us his assessment of the grid. And that really was pivotal in my understanding. I think you already knew all the stuff that Ross was talking about. But for me, it made me even more respect Nico. Because, I mean, over the years, I've always thought, why is he the guy that the teams have called in when they've needed a reserve driver?
Yep.
And he didn't have a full time seat? Why had it been that he had moved around and kind of in the same vein as a Carlos, that the teams that he had been with improve after they've had him in their mix,
Right.
and that because of the politics and or the business of Formula 1, maybe he didn't bring some of the things that the teams had to choose other drivers, but nobody has ever seemed to ever say anything negative about Nico's talent, and that it might be
Hmm.
some other component that just outweighed him. But yet he continued for all these years developing his racecraft. In that sense, so much like your favorite driver, Fernando, just that same generation of racing that was about just putting in the laps, developing the skill, and going through a much more hard knock way of getting to the top. And
Hmm.
just the placement of the cards in his hands just hadn't happened. Like I will tell you, every time everybody over the years has said, "Oh, he's had this many race starts and never made podiums," and he kind of felt like a joke that people would say. It really upset me because I was like, "You still don't understand that he's got talent. It's just not it's not playing out for this guy to get forward like he
Right.
should be." And so then yesterday to watch that race and to say, okay, please don't let anything happen, just let him get it, was absolutely inspiring. The other side of that, I told you to buckle up because I had a lot of thought on this and I haven't finished my race notes, so you're getting
There
my
you go.
unvarnished, is to see his team, one, Gabriel, and how he was ecstatic. And you and John have taught me that your teammate is your biggest rival. Gabriel had no reason to be as excited for his teammate as he was, other than the fact that they actually have a healthy team culture, that they can balance competitiveness with seeing what the other person has done. And of all people, Gabriel would know how hard Nico has struggled to wrestle that car into the position that he did because he's driving the same car. And so
Yep.
for him to say, "You were legendary, man," I was like, golly, that's awesome. Then to see the energy of his team and just the joy, it made me think of when Jules Bianchi got points. I forgot what race it was with his team and their
Yes.
joy of finally getting their points. It was very indicative of that to me. And then there was a video that Nico's wife or partner had posted of their daughter watching the TV when he gets his trophy. I mean, her joy, and it even looked like on the TV that he was looking at her as he got that, the way the camera was angled. It was just absolutely precious. And it wasn't one of those races where you could kind of argue, oh, well, such and such happened. That's why he got. No, it was a masterclass of being resilient through that entire race and having Lewis Hamilton on behind you.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say is
And I
that,
was like,
you know,
amazing.
that's enough pressure. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yep.
And so like they're in two different cars and he's actually able to hold Lewis Hamilton he's in a Sauber and Lewis is in a Ferrari, which we know has not been doing that great, but they're still in that sense I kept thinking these are two cars that are not that great, but they're talented drivers inside of them wrestling with one another and Nico came out ahead. That is absolutely breathtaking. And then the
Hmm.
thing that I kept seeing was everybody was saying Nico's kindness and his character was just as impactful to them as his race skill. And that to me was the epitome of what we want positive out of the sport is that you have a driver who has got a healthy sense of self, healthy sense of competition, still sees their competitors for their humanity, but still sees them as competitors, is going to go out there and give it his all and make them work for it if they're going to beat him, and still treats his teammate with respect. But also, again, he's my biggest rival and giving his all to his team. And this is all the stuff that we all want to see. So, like, I felt like what we witnessed yesterday is exactly why we watch racing
Hmm.
through the, like I said earlier, the ebbs and flows. And I thought it was amazing that for those who have maybe come to the race as a result of the Formula One movie, I hope they understand what they just saw of 15 years of hard work to get to that moment and that we all got to witness something in history of the sport. Okay. I don't know how long that will end up being to our audience. I apologize, but I'm still like on a high on this win.
I love it. Well, and certainly I was very happy for Nico. I have a little bit of a slightly different take on the relationship between Hulkenberg and Bortoleto because I think that the culture there at stake, Sauber, is like, hey, look, we know we've got a car that ain't up to scratch. Instead of racing each other, let's work together and do everything we can to get that car better. And then once it gets better and we're actually fighting for points or whatever, instead of, fighting for 14th and 15th, let's work together and move this thing forward, and then we'll worry about racing each other. And I get the feeling that there's a little bit of that going on. And of course, Bortoleto being a rookie, that is actually taking pressure off of him. I mean, if there ever was a guy that had a door open to just develop and not be under the white hot spotlight, it's got to be Bortoleto and Ollie Behrman, right? Because everybody else has a spotlight turned on. I mean, Kimmy's got it turned on white hot, but Behrman and Gabriel, I mean, they're in great positions to just develop their craft this year.
Yeah, I think you're spot on about the teammate dynamic because as you said that, it made me think of some videos that I had watched of the relationship between Nico and Gabriel, where Nico's daughter was at the track and Gabriel was sitting with them and they were all three talking and you could see there was an actual like it made me think of a big brother and little brother and then the big brother's kid, like your niece
Yep.
and this desire to take him under his wing and realize this kid has the potential, which we talked about this a few months ago. I can't remember which conversation it was, but I know we said it on the podcast, is that initially, and I think it was in the aftermath of Helmut Marko making a statement that was a little kind of sideways clip at Gabriel. And I remember I was not really pleased with that because, and I remember I said, Fernando is his manager. Fernando's not going to put or advocate for Gabriel to be somewhere that he didn't think it was going to help his rookie, his driver, continue to thrive. And
Yep.
yes, it doesn't make any sense right now what's going on at Sauber. They've been awfully at the back and it's been really kind of quiet. But that doesn't mean that when you're under, like you're underwater, like a submarine underwater, it doesn't mean it's like it's sunk. It's just underwater, getting positioned where it needs to be.
Yep.
And so now watching it kind of seem like it's surfacing up and you better start taking it seriously. Um, I do think that Gabriel is being allowed to thrive and figure it out, as you so wisely noted, without that spotlight. I think
Hmm.
that it will only work to his benefit. And we're seeing that. I think his rise in the season by it happening at the timing that it is makes a lot of sense because it gives him now opportunity to continue enhancing it versus expecting him right out of the gate to be making points. Nobody expected that because the car
Right.
wasn't there.
Right.
So I do think that you're very astute and wise, which is not a shocker, Professor, that
Hmm.
that you have given us that to think about. I'm really excited to see. I what I did write in my notes is I'm really hopeful that what we're seeing is not a track specific situation for the Sauber. I want to believe that they're actually making a pivotal change. And I think it's because Jonathan Wheatley's there now. I want to believe that that is going to turn them in the correct direction and
I agree.
even further. What do you do? You agree with
Yeah.
me?
Yeah. I think that they're making real strides now. It could very well be that those strides wind up being somewhat track specific, but at least they're in the hunt at some tracks.
That's a good point. Well, and
Yeah.
I mean, even some of the things that we've scratched our heads over happening at Red Bull seem to be things that were under the purview of Wheatley when he was there. So to me, it just seems like this is a very interesting that one team's seeming like they're treading while another one is seeming to like getting their, stabilized
Right.
in the situation through. And that only goes to show how much a team leadership, a team's individual players make an impact on the actual full team culture and direction.
No question about it. In so many ways, culture will trump a lot of things.
Hmm.
Good culture versus bad culture in an organization.
Well, and
Yep.
so now pivoting onto the other teams and drivers, kind of our individual takeaways from where things stand. I guess then it would be to look at McLaren and Lando and
Hmm.
Oscar and going to team dynamic individuals. I think they seem to have a healthy team culture. I think that's part of the reason for their success.
Yeah.
I think that the battle is definitely underway. I mean, the Canada crash that was a little, as we already
Yeah.
said, a little problematic. But then they had a good, healthy battle in Austria. But
Yep.
then you had Silverstone, which that was a little bit of an icy situation. But I don't necessarily know that I think it's the team. I just think that it's an unfortunate. My opinion is that Oscar, based off of what I read and listened to, Oscar did make a heavy braking, and that did incur the penalty. I think the area that I is problematic and not so much for the team, it seems to be the gravity or how severe the penalty was assessed. That's
Right.
what seems to be the issue and the argument. And that if it hadn't been his, it seems like if it hadn't been his rival, or if his teammate hadn't been number two, it had been any other driver, there might have been a complaint lodged, but I don't see how you could do that for your own if your other driver is the other one kind of in play. And so I think Oscar maybe as he cooled down a little bit, probably realized his error. You correct me if I'm wrong. The distinction between what happened here at Silverstone versus the Canada George Max situation, which is similar braking situation with the safety car, was that in Canada, we knew that the safety car was going to continue for the rest of the race. In Silverstone, it was ending, so there's a different
Yep.
timing of it.
Yep.
The visibility between the two races was dramatically different. We'd already been seeing a lot more crashes happening at Silverstone. And so if with Oscar's braking, which I think my understanding was because of the heating he needed to get onto those tires, there may have been a valid reason for wanting to brake. But the way that it was done at such a high pressure caused Max to have to go in the direction that he did, which also could have had a concertina effect for everybody else behind, which is maybe what led the stewards to assess the higher end of the spectrum of penalty versus the
Yeah.
lower. Am I understanding this correctly? That's
Seems
why?
Seems reasonable to me. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that that's absolutely 100% correct, but
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I mean, I looked at it and I thought to my first thing I thought was, oh, yeah, Oscar's brake checking everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and the ramifications down the field could have been a number of cars being taken out. As it turned out, nobody did, but I think 10 seconds seemed about right, and Oscar went so
Really?
far. Yeah, and Oscar went so far as to say, hey, let's switch positions. Would you invoke team orders? And McLaren wouldn't do it. And
Mm-hmm.
he was miffed about it at the time, but then later, after he had, like you said, had a chance to cool down and think about it, he agreed that had team orders been enacted, it would not have been fair to Lando. So at the end of the day, to his credit, he thought about it and kind of took his lumps. And, let's
Mm-hmm.
face it, they're only halfway through the season. He's the championship leader. There's still a lot of racing to do. So I think he's
Mm-hmm.
looking at it from that perspective.
Okay, well, I hadn't heard that he had because I've been so busy, so I hadn't heard that he had acknowledged that if the team orders had been invoked, what you just said. So that's good to hear because I, I just remember I only really got to pay attention to it through the immediate race, and I could tell he was very upset. I think most
Hmm.
everybody could see that. And I
Sure.
don't begrudge him of that because it's just like when we talk about racers being interviewed and in the aftermath of the race, their adrenaline is going, as much as we want them to be camera ready, they've been pushed to the limit. And so I can't expect them to always be sharp and perfect like we want them to be
Right.
as the celebrities and the notables that they are. I don't know that he did it like playing games. I didn't want to believe that Oscar did that to because he just doesn't strike me as trying to play this kind of because it was implied by some team, maybe it was Red Bull, that this was some tactic to put Max into a bad situation. I actually thought if he was trying to get heat into the tires, could it have been this is not a position that Oscar has found himself at the front of the pack in a
Hmm.
wet situation in a Formula One car. And so this is where he just maybe it's not like Max who's accustomed to doing this because he's been sitting at the front of the pack for so many races for so many years. And
Yep.
here Oscar maybe just misjudged it. He's human and it wasn't malicious in any way. Maybe this is me
Right.
being too Pollyannish about it. And then if that's the case, if his own error led to this, if I was in that position, I'd be ticked off at myself as well because I made a mistake or I didn't do it as precisely as I think I should have. For someone like him who really is sharp and on it all the time, you got to think that there had to have been some level, even subconsciously, of like, darn it, why did I do that?
Yeah.
And now look where I've done, kind of thing. So
Right.
I felt like as we watched it, that I was glad that McLaren didn't invoke the team orders. I think that that would have been just not smart in general, especially with
Hmm.
it being Lando at the British Grand Prix. And if that just would have been not great. I didn't, but I say all that because in the immediate, you got the sense that people were thinking that this was something like a bias against Oscar because he wasn't British. I didn't take it that way. As a
Nah,
non-British person, I felt like this
nah.
was the thing that they needed to do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All
I mean,
right.
one of the things that I've always been saying for the longest time is that these guys don't know what to do with a rolling start. At the end of the day. They're just not very good at them. And it's no knock on them other than the fact that they just don't have that much experience with them, right? They're more
Mm-hmm.
standing start kind of guys. And I look at, like a restart on an IndyCar race or something like that. Those guys know how to do it. And they're hugely aggressive, by the way, all through the field. And so you go and do stuff like what Oscar did, okay, I kind of get it. You kind of see that a little bit sometimes in oval track racing and stuff like that, but he overdid it. That would be my that would be my
Yeah,
take about
that's
it.
a really good point. Because I can't remember, was it Austria or was it this year at Silverstone for F2? I can't remember which race it was. They had to do, yeah, it was F2 this week in Silverstone. They had to do a second formation lap because Dino's car didn't start. And I remember thinking, "Oh no, this isn't going to bode well because they're going to have to get back into the positions and all this stuff." And so yeah, you're right. Like trying to do a rolling start or just anything that's off of the norm that they're accustomed to is going to be problematic for them because they're
Yep.
so attuned to doing it the same way every time. Okay, on that note, someone who's doing his best to just bring it every week, as you said, Russell and Kimmy and Mercedes.
Yep.
Okay, so this kind of goes into the thing that I said I was going to write down. You thought that Russell's been putting it, quietly together. Do you think that it's because Russell's trying to prove he's the one that Mercedes should continue? Like, do you give any credence to any of these gossipy things that people are talking about that Max is going to come over to Mercedes and then therefore now Mercedes has to figure out which of the two that they're going to drop?
I think it's really complicated.
Okay.
I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire. George is being a racing driver. Okay, I think first and foremost, I think he's being a racing driver. And he does not have the best car in the grid, but he has a car that sometimes is good enough to win. And so he is doing what the car and the track conditions will give him. And I would say he's doing about as good a job as anybody could hope to do under the circumstances. The distraction, I'm going to call it the distraction of all this talk about Max leaving Red Bull and coming to Mercedes and blah, blah, blah. George is creating a good enough resume for himself that he can probably go to any one of about three or four different teams if Max were to be signed by Mercedes. Red Bull being one of them. Red Bull's got a massive problem. They're not going to keep Yuki. They might promote Hadjar next year, but they still have a seat that's open. And you got to believe that they're going to put somebody experienced in there like a George Russell who brings the big team knowledge with him. So George might be thinking, yeah, I really don't want to leave Mercedes because I think their engine's going to be really good next year. But on the other hand, if he's worried about whether he's going to be in Formula One or not, he doesn't have anything to worry about. It's one of those kind of deals. Here's the thing, and this is the businessman in me. Okay. So let's say Mercedes signs Max for $75 million a year. And let's say it's a 3-year deal. After that, Max isn't sure that he wants to race anymore. So he signs a 3-year deal, $75 million a year. So that's $225 million. George ain't making anywhere near that kind of money over the next 3 years. And here's the interesting part. Everybody talks about that performance clause where if Max is fourth in the championship at the summer break, then he has that performance clause that he can exercise and leave and all that kind of stuff. Okay, let's say he's not able to invoke that performance clause. He can still get out of his Red Bull contract, but it's going to cost $100 million to get out. So Mercedes has got to come up with 3 years of salary for Max, $225 million, plus another $100 million And by the way, I don't know if it's $75 million a year. It may be 100 million a year. I don't know. Let's call it 75 just for talking's sake. And then you throw 100 million in on top. So for 3 years, max is going to cost you $325 million. So if I'm sitting on the board of directors at Mercedes-Benz and I'm looking at that $325 price tag, the first thing I'm going to ask is, how many cars do I have to sell extra just to cover max? And understand, if it's a 20% profit margin, then over 3 years, they're going to have to sell an extra $1.5 billion worth of cars. That's what it means if Mercedes goes and buys Max. So can the calculus that they have to do is, can he bring that kind of extra revenue to Mercedes? Because that's what it's going to be worth.
You want my opinion?
Go for it.
I think they'd say yes.
I think probably so too.
I really do, because I mean, I think you make a great case as to the calculations they probably are making. But I think their history tells them, if you have the superstar, you're going to be making money every which direction.
Yep.
And it's worth, I don't really think it's the whole regret aspect for Toto. I think it's literally they want to have the best driver on the grid. And
Yeah.
that is priceless for them. They know how to manage a racer like that and
Hmm.
to develop him, and then to put him alongside Kimmy and groom him to be the next generation for the day that Max decides he's hanging up his actual racing suit and going to continue doing whatever else he wants to do. Because of the marketability, everybody knows Mercedes. You put Mercedes and Max, I could see the branding and messaging, campaigning, all that kind of stuff that could come from that, that they can say, we can sell so much and, find other ways to monetize. I also think that they could be creative in giving him other incentives that, if they don't want to do the full, as you said, 75 million, they can find like stocks and stuff like that, other things that could
Sure.
be just as lucrative for him.
Yep.
And I think that it could be the very things that Lewis might have wanted that they weren't willing to give. And that
Mm.
now that they no longer have a Lewis personality, because they've struggled quite a bit, it's very clear to me, at least, looking at their branding, they're struggling to figure out what's the selling point for Mercedes without a superstar.
Mm.
And while they're waiting to mature the Kimmy star, because as much as I love, like, please don't mishear me, I love George. I think he's a fantastic racer, racecraft. I think he has earned his stripes, and I think he should continue in that seat. He's not the superstar that in the current era of sports that everybody kind of wants to have. And I
Yep.
think he's trying his very best to bridge both, of continuing to make sure his racecraft speaks for itself, but he's not a name that is transcending the sport.
Yeah.
Max is doing that without doing it the way that we've kind of seen someone like Lewis do it. So that's where I think that a company like Mercedes Group actually might take the gamble. I do agree
Hmm.
with you that the performance clause is irrelevant, because as we know with all things contracts, you can figure a way out of it.
Oh yeah.
But I
And
think
and
you're
those
right. It is the dollar that's when I watch what's happening, I keep thinking it's the dollar that's tripping everybody up right now. And I
yeah,
think
I
you laid it
mean,
out exactly what's going on.
yeah, and I think, there are going to be people on the board that says, look, we know we probably have the best engine for
Mm-hmm.
2026,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if we have the best engine for 2026, we know we can build a pretty decent chassis. Aston Martin's going to probably
Mm-hmm.
have the best chassis out there, but we don't
Mm-hmm.
know what Honda's going to offer. But we're going to have best engine, one of the best chassis. You know what? That's a good enough mix for George Russell to be world champion next year.
You think so?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, think about how right Mercedes got it when the whole turbo hybrid era came in. If you didn't have a Mercedes
Mm.
powered car, forget it. You were toast. I mean, Williams, consistently finished
Mhm,
third
that's true.
behind the two Mercedes. And so there are going to be people on the Mercedes board saying, George is quick enough. Anyway, it'd
That
be
I mean
interesting.
that is that is a very good point. George is quick enough versus we want to have the superstar is the other side. Like I maybe that's what's happening. They have two different factions on the board and they can't come to a conclusion of which one needs to
Right.
go. Because I mean, when you highlighted that George is doing great in a not the best car, I immediately thought, well, that's because he came through the Williams experience. And look how hard he worked to extrapolate as much as he could out of the
Yeah.
car at Williams that was when he was there.
Yeah.
Especially now that we know how bad it really was for
Right.
him. My suspicion is there's probably a generational divide happening on the Mercedes board.
Hmm.
They're looking at their bottom line. They're thinking through, as you noted, how much are they willing to pay? And because as we're seeing all these different gossipy things, I kept thinking it must be getting really difficult for it now to start be coming out into the more public arena. And
Right.
with every day delayed, they must really be going at it right now.
Oh, yeah, I think so. And, now in my heart of hearts, I
Hmm.
really think that Mercedes is going to do whatever it takes to get Max. That's what I think. Toto's going to enjoy sticking it to Kristen Horner if for no other reason than that, right?
Mm.
There's a little bit of that going on. But at the end of the day, I think that that's probably, what's going to happen is that Max is going to go to Mercedes and George basically is going to be in a position where all of a sudden he's in demand. I mean, if you're Cadillac, do you throw him a whole bunch of money? I don't know. Maybe.
Well, I mean, the discussion that keeps coming up is Cadillac's looking at who is it, Valtteri, and then
Valtteri?
if you brought in George, then you definitely get the Mercedes like
Yeah.
institutional
Information.
knowledge,
Yeah.
yeah, for quite
Yeah.
as a driver for quite, quite a number of years.
Hmm.
That's an
Yep.
interesting proposition. I mean,
Yeah.
I do want to see George in a car that showcases his ability because we're seeing
Right.
it.
Right.
And after so many years of him working so hard to get to that seat, I
Right.
want to see him be able to be right up there. And every time he does pull it out, I'm like, this is why he's there. His craft is there and he should be able to be running at the front of the pack with a car
Yep.
that gives him that. I mean,
Oh,
I,
yeah.
I would hope that if the seat did come open at Red Bull, that they would really give him a serious look and it would be a good fit because I would hope that they can continue, despite what seems to be the exodus of staff, that they still have the institutional building blocks to be able to figure it out.
At the end of the day, I mean, stopping at Red Bull would not be a bad thing. But, then the other one is that, how secure is Lance Stroll's seat at Aston
Mm-hmm.
Martin?
Mm-hmm.
If you're Lawrence Stroll and you're spending billions of dollars, right, for all the very, very best, you're certainly not going to replace Fernando, but you may have to look at replacing your own kid. And if that were to happen, okay, then you put George Russell in there. Let's think about this. English driver, English team, starts to look pretty good.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean,
It's
you would think
interesting.
they would be pushing for a Max to come over.
Well, yeah, because I mean, let's face it. Max loves Adrian Newey, and the feeling's mutual. And let's face it, Max and Honda have had a lot of success together, so it makes
Mm-hmm.
sense that they would, want Max back on the factory Honda team. I don't know. It's just really interesting.
It is. And well, when you bring up Lance, I had this in my notes and we're kind of jumping around, but it's totally fine. I keep wondering about the fact that, he had the surgery on his arms, but it seems he's racing.
Yeah,
And that's a shocker to me.
sure recovered
And
quick.
right, right. Like you're just going, I know that we all heal differently, but that seems kind of a very rapid healing. Nobody's been talking about that, at least that I can see.
No, I haven't seen a
And
word about it.
right? And so you just kind of wonder, could there be more happening behind the scenes there? And is it, I mean, Lance did a decent Silverstone, and even that, it seems like it was largely because he didn't do well in qualifying, so he had some more tire options that Alonso didn't get to have because he did qualify higher. And I just
Yep.
thought, okay, that's just the wonkiest thing that we're
Yep.
seeing that again. Talk about the F1 film. That was
That was
one
it.
of the talking points,
Yeah.
which was so weird to see that happen in reality. Because I had just finished telling somebody, I was like, that's such an odd situation to put into the film.
But
So
then you see
go
it in
ahead.
real life,
Yeah, and you
That's
go, well, that just made me a liar. Okay,
yeah.
thanks. I
Yeah.
don't try to lie. So yeah, it would be interesting if somehow the seat changed in Aston Martin. I mean, you would think again that if it was going to happen, it would happen sooner rather than later, right? I
Yeah.
know people have always been talking about this, but this seems like the moment or around the time that we would need to start seeing these things happen, especially because even Adrian Newey was at the Silverstone race and they showed him kind of eyeballing all the cars. And if he's
Yep.
getting hunkered down in and figuring out the Aston culture, really turning his eye to 26, is he also thinking and saying things that, hey, we need to reevaluate the lineup?
Hmm.
I don't, in that sense, I don't envy Lawrence Stroll because it has
No.
always seemed to me that it's been a father son dream for Lance to go to the top with Aston Martin.
Yep.
And if that
Yep.
doesn't happen, how do you say that to your son? I don't know. In that sense, I feel empathy for him. Like, that's
Yeah.
just got to
I
be
mean,
hard.
yeah, Lance will be fine. He'll be just
Yeah.
fine. But you could always put him in the sports car program that Aston
Yeah.
Martin has going. I'm sure that he would thrive there. So
Yeah.
we'll see. That's all we can do is say we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. We went into a lot of drama we generally don't go into. That did get us a
Uh-huh.
little side, but it's stuff that I've been wanting to talk to you about. Didn't intend it for so much to get on the record, but hey, it is what it is. I don't think we're saying anything anybody else
Nah,
isn't really saying.
nah.
Okay, so we've talked about Mercedes, we've talked about McLaren, Aston Martin, we've kind of talked about Red Bull. You've mentioned that you don't think that Yuki's going to stay much, he'll stay
Yeah.
probably through the season.
Yeah.
And what do you think about Arvid Lindblad being moved up into that second seat?
Oh, I hope not. I
Hmm.
mean, they just keep destroying young drivers, and
Hmm.
it's just like let Yuki finish out the season, let him have his dignity. And if they want to bring Lindblad up, okay, fine. But I mean, don't put him in a Red Bull next year for crying out loud. Please do not do that.
Hmm.
If anybody, I mean, originally I would have said, oh yeah, Hadjar would be the next heir apparent, but I don't know, man. I mean, Lawson's starting to look pretty good, and he's getting his mojo back, But on the other hand, if somebody said, "Hey, you want to go jump in the Red Bull and replace Yuki?" He'd probably say, "Hell no,"
Hmm.
Because I mean,
Hmm.
let's face it. Look at how Yuki's doing. Look how Lawson's doing.
Yeah.
And I mean, Lawson wasn't exactly spectacular at Silverstone. He had a very difficult race, but every rookie did, except
Hmm.
for Behrman.
Hmm.
Behrman was brilliant at Silverstone, but he had learned a hard lesson at, was it Brazil last year when he was stepping
Hmm.
in for somebody?
Right,
And
right.
right. And so he got caught out. So he had already learned his lesson, whereas all these other guys, they were out spinning like tops and smashing tens of
Hmm.
or hundreds of thousands of dollars of race cars. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's part of it.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting you bring up the spinning out because I was listening to Peter Windsor and he was noting that the spray in these modern Formula One cars is very different than the older cars. And said that it's more like a rooster in the older cars, but when you have things like the diffusers that we have now, it really does create a much more of a haze. And
Yep.
he said that he'd had a conversation with Nigel Mansell, I think it was, who said that the way that he would deal with the spray back then was that he would listen for the car ahead of him, and that would give him the ability to know had they released off, I think he said they released off the throttle and something else, and he could hear it. And I
Right.
thought to myself, well, that's a very interesting thing, but that's also something that comes with maturity and racing.
Right.
You develop that skill. So when I watched these rookies, I kept thinking, yeah, this is just it's so much for them right now.
Yeah.
These poor kids trying to just get through this race, let alone
Hmm.
successful at like at getting points. So
Right.
yeah, I would be intrigued, like going back to the Max um leaving Red Bull. It would be interesting if they elevated both Isaac and Liam into Red
Hmm.
Bull
Hmm.
and really develop the car for clearly these two drivers who have the capacity to pull out some amazing
Right.
races. It seems like whoever is matched up against Max just does not have the same racecraft or racing skill or preference or setup, whatever it is that's the differential
Yeah.
between Max and his awesomeness compared to everybody else who's
Yeah.
good, but he's just like at a level that everybody else isn't. And instead, if you had two evenly matched drivers who could really eke out the most out of a car, in that sense, kind of reminiscent of like Carlos and Charles at Ferrari, that
Yeah.
thing, or even Lando and Oscar at
Yeah.
McLaren,
Yeah.
that would be wonderful to see if Red Bull could do something like that
Sure.
with their race, because it seems like Racing Bulls is able to do that, but at a not at the elite level that Red Bull
Right.
has been able to do it.
Right.
Okay, so then moving on to Williams, what are your thoughts? I will say that I've been trying to tell myself not to become despondent just yet because earlier in the year it looked like, wow, this is amazing. And then I've tried to recalibrate and remind myself they're doing better than they have ever done. It's
Hmm.
just at this point in the season, it may not be like they've still made progress. It's just not that upward trajectory that we were getting accustomed to until now. It seems
Yeah.
like they've had a major dip. And I did hear that Val said that they've already pivoted to 26, which goes back to your point that most of the teams, if not all, are already at 26. But he
Yeah.
said they'd already pivoted quite a while ago. And so it just seems like buckle up and just be prepared that it's going to be hard. I
Hmm.
wonder how Alex and Carlos really are going to hold steady through the rest of this year if these last few races are indicative of what it's going to be like.
Yeah. And some of it though, and again, I'm going to sound real flippant when I say this, but it's almost like that cartoon anvil that kept dropping on Fernando at the early part of the year. Somehow Fernando has been able to convince that anvil to fall on Carlos instead. And you look at kind of some of the crazy stuff that's happening to Carlos lately, and it's
Yeah.
sort of like the cartoon anvil is falling on him. And suddenly Fernando is, he's scoring points now, not like in the quantities that he'd like to be scoring points, but he's scoring points. Whereas, Carlos is having a hard time getting out of Q1 for crying out loud. And a lot of times, I don't think it's his fault. And so, anyway, I think that they're going to be in for more of the same because you're right. We are used to seeing kind of an upward trajectory for Williams. We got kind of used to it last year because Albon was turning in some pretty stellar performances. And then here comes, 2025 and Carlos, and they look good in winter testing, blah, blah, blah. Start off really, really strong, and now they're tailing off. And I think that it's two or three things. One, expectations are higher for them now. So there's that that's going on. I think, the fact that they're looking at the 2026 car and really whatever development bits they're bringing for this year, it's probably just circuit specific. Hey, we need better brake cooling or whatever. So I think that that's going to be an issue. And then there's racing luck. And I'm sorry, but there is such a thing as racing luck. And I think right now that's happening on the Williams side of the equation, and especially with Carlos.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you said. I
Yeah.
do think it is just a very interesting point in the season. We'll
Yeah,
see.
we'll
Hopefully, the
see.
anvil will just go and take a rest. It doesn't need
Yeah,
to drop on Fernando, and it doesn't need to drop on Carlos.
no.
Just go and sit in the corner.
Yeah,
Let's
go
leave it
sit in the
there at
corner.
that.
We don't need you. These guys can screw it up on their own.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, so then what are your thoughts about Haas, Esteban, and Ollie? You've kind of mentioned Ollie a couple of times,
Yeah.
but in the overall look at them.
They definitely have a very circuit specific car. And as we've talked before, IO has done a great job of changing the culture, bringing in a new form of discipline. And, Ocon he hasn't done the crazy stuff that we're used to seeing Ocon do. It's like he's driving with a greater level of maturity. And when the car, it's a little bit like George in that when the car is giving him what it can give him and the track conditions suit the car, Ocon's coming through with some pretty decent performances, as is Ollie. I've been really impressed. Ollie has had a quiet year for the most part, but every once in a while you look at him, you go, dang, he's running. How did that happen? One of those kind of deals. And so I feel like Haas actually has been doing quite well, all things considered, because I mean, I was wondering, how were they going to afford the crash damage by hiring Ocon? But Ocon's done a good job, so I'm pleasantly surprised.
I think I agree with you in so many ways because I wonder if by giving Esteban a very clear leadership role between the two drivers, it
Hmm.
brought down the temperature, the unhealthy elements of competitiveness that racers can have,
Yep.
right? Like proving need and this desire to prove, but instead of when you start to feel at peace with yourself,
Yep.
then your natural starts to come out and the good things that everyone can see in you starts to show itself. And
Mm.
by not feeling so much as threatened, because I mean, when we think about his previous teammates, Esteban had either been with a peer who he felt very competitive and had a history with, or
Yep.
someone who was clearly a world champion and like
Yeah.
should feel threatened by, right? Like an and even subconsciously possibly intimidated by. But in this case, he's kind of got the established and experience maturity that he should have. And then having, as you said, the culture that IO has sought to develop probably started to just bring the temperature down into the
Hmm.
situation. And I think that watching Esteban this season, especially, I feel like Ollie's brought out some really good stuff in him that I don't necessarily know that we saw. And
Yep.
Esteban just seems a little bit more at peace.
Yep.
And of course, that's got to be good for him as a driver to feel not so stressed, I guess. I mean, I keep thinking too, the fact that they keep pulling out these P9s, P10, P11, P12, 13, it's got to be building some kind type of racing discipline and endurance that
Hmm.
as the car starts to either in this season the specific stuff that they're going to probably tweak will it'll only harden the muscles and strengthen the muscles of how to do this well and endure, let alone set them up for next year to really be
Right.
at the front of the middle of that pack, if not at the back of the front of the pack, the
Yep.
front pack, So I
Yep.
just feel like watching them, I can see the wisdom of the matchup that I didn't necessarily think. I thought we were asking for so much hurt
Oh yeah.
and angst, but instead I can see what they saw because we're seeing the results. I
Yep.
hope that it continues to endure. Nothing upsets the status that they've created there, that they can just kind
Hmm.
of become. I even want to wonder if the fact that Esteban has a female strategist is working to his benefit because women
Oh, that's
approach things
interesting.
differently than guys do,
Yep.
and we're much more emotive and can catch subconscious stuff that guys don't necessarily, they kind of tend to I'm not trying to speak negatively of guys. I'm just saying that we're more intuitive as women,
Yeah.
and so there could be something that kind of brings a different aura into the
Hmm.
room by
Yes,
having a
could
female
be.
strategist.
Could
Maybe I'm
be.
just thinking too highly of us, but I don't think I am.
No, I don't think so. You know what? Sometimes it's the old, race engineer to driver chemistry, right? Sometimes you have it, sometimes you don't, but when you have it, it's pretty powerful. So maybe that's the deal,
That's true
you know?
too.
You never know.
Yeah. Okay, so then talk about race engineer, strategist, and driver. Let's move to Ferrari.
Yeah, I knew that was coming. I walked right into that one.
You really set me up so well because that was what I had on the list. What do you think is going on over there? What are your thoughts about all of this?
Lewis obviously has set very high standards for himself, and I think he expected to have a challenge at Ferrari. I don't think he expected the challenge to be quite in the shape that it turned out to be. The Ferrari is, again, it leans towards being a circuit specific car, I think. And I think like the Red Bull, it has a narrow setup window, although the Red Bull's is even more finicky than the Ferrari. This Ferrari, by everything that I'm reading, it is tricky to set up, tricky to drive. And I think Lewis is also having to come to grips with the culture of Ferrari and the way they do things. And he's probably having to exert some of his will to fix some of the things that he sees. And so I think there's some of that going on. I wonder how much of a distraction the whole Fred Vasseur thing is, which to me is ludicrous. But on the other hand, we are talking Ferrari, so who knows? But I think at the same time, I think that you can kind of see gradual improvement. Charles been doing, I think, a very good job this year. Lewis has been doing a very good job. I just don't think the results are showing because he's still not happy and comfortable. But I also see the trend going in the right direction for Lewis. That 3-4 that they had at Silverstone yesterday, that shows the strength of both of their drivers and their strategy, because that race was a strategic race for sure.
Wait, I'm sorry. Say
Sorry,
that again.
sorry. Ferrari finished fourth and fifth. Sorry, I
Yeah.
believe. Yeah, sorry
No,
about
no,
that.
no.
No?
No.
Am
Charles
I thinking?
finished P14.
Oh, excuse me. You know what I was thinking about? I was thinking about Austria.
That's
Yeah,
what I was thinking. I was
yeah,
like, I
yeah,
think he's you
yeah,
you
yeah.
you you got the right numbers. I was like, I think you called the wrong race. No,
Yep,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree with you on the Ferrari at Austria. That was like, wow.
yeah,
The 3-4 was it that they did
yep.
there?
It was
Yeah,
a 3-4,
it
Charles,
was a 3-4
and
and it was
yep,
like they held off so much of the field at Austria of all
yep,
places. Yeah,
yep.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
so
then
I see glimmers, right? That's
mhm.
the whole thing. And I think it's very much a work in process. There's going to be times for Ferrari to shine. I mean, what would be amazing is for Lewis to win at Monza in a Ferrari, which, it could happen. You gotta do the race, right? And so let's see what happens. But I think they're trending in the right direction, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy or smooth sailing at all,
I mean,
in my
I would
opinion.
agree with you about the trending. I think the question is how quickly is that trend going
Correct.
to accelerate, right?
Correct.
I'm with you that there are glimmers and then there are some major moments where you're like, what in the world? Like Canada and the whole box, I don't want to
Yep.
box. And
Yep.
I just remember watching the race and like giving the face bomb and going, where are we? Back to 2022 and 2023? Like, what is this? And then,
Yeah.
of course, that was just Charles. But then this growing pains that Lewis is seeming to have
Hmm.
of not feeling like he's understanding. And we all kind of knew that that was a potential to happen because he'd had such a long-standing relationship with Bono and Mercedes. We knew that there would be some growing pains, but to feel that all the way until almost the mid-season it just kind of feels like, ooh, that's gotta be hard for someone like Lewis. I do remember after the Austria race, they clipped or they did a zoom in to Lewis looking at the standings results and that it felt like as I watched him that it was bittersweet. Like he wanted it to be better. He knew
Hmm.
that they had done better in comparison to the field, but it wasn't an easy win, or like it was a hard fought
Yeah.
P3 and P4, and he still felt, it looked like he felt still defeated despite the fact that he got fourth, if that
Mm.
makes sense.
Mm.
And I just felt really like, oh, that's got to be hard for someone
Sure.
who is of his caliber and made such a major change. But I agree with you. Monza would be wonderful to see. I just don't know how they're going to do it fast enough
Right.
because I just don't see the culture seems to be something's up. I do think that this whole Fred business, it must be the internal politics coming out very publicly.
Hmm.
The other thing, did you know it's I think I read somewhere that Fred's mom passed away in these
Oh, I didn't see
weeks.
that. Yeah, I didn't know that.
And if what I read was true, that just kind of upset me. Like all this discussion and like such a public uh
Forum.
roasting of him,
Yeah.
while a parent is I didn't read if it was not that any death is good, but like if it was someone who had been suffering and passing, or if it was a sudden passing. Apparently that's why he was not I think it was at Austria because his mom had passed.
Mm.
I just thought, maybe that's been affecting his mindset and ability. Because as much as we'd all love to be able to compartmentalize our
Right.
lives, that could be an issue. But I still have a lot of confidence that he knows what he's doing and that give him a little bit more time
Oh, yeah.
to pull this out.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
maybe some room still left. I don't
Yeah.
know. I'd
In
like to see it
principle
at
at
least through
Ferrari,
Monza.
rough job.
Yeah, right?
Rough job.
Like,
Rough job.
yeah, you don't pay them enough, it feels like,
No.
listening to how
No.
much everybody's got an opinion in every
Oh,
which
yeah.
direction.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
Um, okay, so then on that note, talking about teams that you're just like, oh, this has got to be brutal for them. Let's get to
Hmm.
I think our final team, which is the Alpines.
Yeah.
Okay, Pierre, he's doing pretty awesome for considering the circumstances,
Yeah.
especially yesterday, P6. I think that kind of flew under the radar with Nico's
Hmm.
win and Lando's win, but Pierre did an excellent job
Yep.
at Silverstone with a
He
car that
did.
wasn't really that great.
Yep.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah. No, you put Pierre in one of the top cars, I think he'd be a big problem for everybody. I feel like that he's really matured into really a hell of a driver, and I hope he gets a shot at having a ride with a decent car that is on a team that is well managed, which is not Alpine. And I think he's done an amazing job. The other part, of course, is that, once again, Alpine has managed to destroy yet another young guy's confidence. They did it to Doohan, and now they've done it to Colapinto, to the point where now the hot rumor is that Colapinto is going to be sacked before Spa, and he's going to be replaced by none other than Valtteri Bottas, which is so typical of Briatore and all that. I've often wondered, did Briatore get lucky and realize that he needed to sign Schumacher when he signed him? And then he got lucky again and was able to say, oh, there's another talent in Fernando Alonso. I'm going to sign this guy. And is he just a really good talent spotter, or is he really a good team principal? And I think he must be a good talent spotter, because I sure as hell am not impressed with what's going on at Alpine. There should have been some major changes by now, and it's not happening. And
Mhm.
so I think the revolving door is just going to continue there, and which just goes to show even more what a mentally tough guy Gasly must be.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Mentally tough. Well, I mean, and he's also come through the Red Bull
Yeah,
process.
yeah, and it may be that
So,
Gasly, since he's dealt with Helmut Marko, it's like Helmut
mhm,
Marko, Flavio Briatore, who cares?
mhm.
You know, that could
Yeah,
be very well what the deal is. Hadn't thought of
yeah.
that. Great
I
point.
mean, I really hope that some leadership changes will occur sooner rather than later at Alpine, and that they can do like we could see the same things that we're seeing at Williams
Yeah.
and Sauber and Haas,
Yeah.
where teams that just really took a dip, but then they're now on the upswing, it seems to be, because Alpine's history is one that you see in the course of the sport and you want to see it come back to the
Yeah.
forefront. Like, I really want to see all the teams having healthy team cultures, excellent drivers, team
Yep.
principles and mindsets in their business, that they're pushing each other in good ways to only just continue rising and doing well,
Hmm.
versus, somebody who's at the back and struggling while everybody else is thriving. I don't want to see that.
Yep.
It isn't fun to watch, in my
No, it's
opinion.
not.
So that is Alpine. And I think we've gone through all 10 of the teams, all 20 of the
Yep.
drivers. We've even threw in a little bit of the Cadillac
Yep.
possibility. I mean, it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, especially because they're highlighting themselves as an American team. We're American, so we'd be very intrigued to see how they manage this. I've been listening to a couple of interviews that Graham Loudon did about talking about where they are in their process. Very fascinating to see how they're going to, in less than 200 days, get a car onto that grid for Australia. I
Yep.
hope that they're able to do that. I think they said 6 different factories across 3 different continents are going to be working on this car. I hope that they can really make us proud as
Yep.
Americans, that
Yep.
they pull out what everyone seems to think is impossible. I just like the car. At this point, what I'd like is for them to have a car that starts, a car that goes, and 2 drivers who will make sure that they finish the race. To
Yeah.
me, that would be success at this point,
Yep.
because what they're trying to do is a pretty monumental task.
Yep.
And then
No question
wins
about
and
it.
all the other stuff that can happen as they get further along. And
Hmm.
have not been able to research enough to understand who are the core leadership and what their understanding and experience of Formula One is. But it seems like they're not going in with naivete, and
Mm-mm.
that they're trying to really go in with experience and do this well. So
Yep.
I really would love to see, since they're now on the grid, I'd love to see them be able to hold their own.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I would
Hmm.
say we cannot overlook the highest ranking American in the Formula Series of Jack Crawford and what he's been doing.
What Jack Crawford has been doing is nothing short of amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I speak for Sabrina when I say that we are so proud of Jack and what he's doing. He's a great guy anyway, and I love the fact that we've got a great guy who's an American, who's a Texan, who's winning over in Europe, and he's winning in difficult circumstances. And even the English commentators are now saying that teams need to be taking a look at Jack as a potential for a Formula One seat. And that just makes me really happy. I don't know what
Yeah.
else to say. I'm just
Yeah.
really proud of him. What he's doing is so difficult anyway, but for an American to do what he's doing, amazing. So,
Mm-hmm.
really happy for him.
Yeah, you do. You said it so well. I would say I'll try to remember to link the article that was recently done by Chris Medlin in Racer
Hmm.
magazine, where Jack and his dad, I think, gave an excellent interview about the challenges that they faced to get to where they are and the choices that they had to make. I was really proud that they noted that, because I don't think people fully grasp how difficult what they are doing.
Right.
And when you watch, and if people who are listening to this podcast are not watching the F2 races, you're doing yourself a disservice. One, because overall the racing this season especially is fantastic. The
Hmm.
competition is very good. But especially if you're an American and you want to see Americans on the grid, watching Jack do some amazing decisions, working with his team, calls that they're making, and even just the way that he's carrying himself on the grid is just really should make you proud.
Yep.
And And I think that the balance is that he's also so humble about it, which is why I
Hmm.
think it's our responsibility as American fans to champion one of our racers that's making his way through despite the odds.
Yep.
And I agree with you that I was really happy to hear the British commentators acknowledge that teams should be looking at Jack, because that
Yep.
was one, and that was really the first time was at Silverstone, was the first time I heard those out of the race, any of the
Yep.
races where they finally said that. And I
Yep.
thought, thank you very much. We would really like you guys to pay attention to this
Yep.
racer. Okay,
Exactly.
so if
So
anybody wondered where our loyalties lie, we've not been, there should be no
they're not
question at this
hidden.
point. They're not hidden. We're very obvious about that. We're
That's
just
right.
so proud of him. Okay,
Yep.
anything else, Dick, that I'm overlooking?
No, got a long break, and then we go to a doubleheader weekend, in that we go to Spa, and then we go to Hungary, and then we have the summer break. So
Hmm.
really, the teams are getting a little bit of rest. I heard that some of the teams are actually bringing development bits that they are actually going to be using, or at least think they are going to be using, on the 2026 car. So it's like they're starting to modify the 2025 cars to use them as real live test beds for bits and pieces going on the 2026 car. So that should be very, very interesting.
Yeah. Ooh, that'll be fun, especially
Hmm.
if it's going to show up at Spa. Very
Oh
nice.
yeah. Oh yeah,
Oh,
for
fun,
sure.
fun, fun.
For
Okay,
sure.
well, Dick,
All
I
right.
know that we had a longer conversation than we generally do, but we had so much ground to cover. It was
We
shocking that it
did.
was only three races,
Yep.
but so much to unpack. And I'm just going to go back to Nico's podium. Anybody who's out there, and if you are questioning, like, should you go further, should you, like, you're questioning yourself, go look at Nico's race, think about his journey, and really just take inspiration about having faith in yourself and being honest with yourself. Should I, can I, maybe the answer is yes. Like, don't give up on something that maybe others just aren't seeing the vision for it. I know that's what I took away from his race.
Yep. Yep. No, it's a great story. And I love your perspective.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dick. Well, I look forward to our next conversation.
Likewise.
Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, Sabrina at twoguysagirlandf1.com. Can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in, because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.